I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. From a young age, I was taught that all the answers were in the Bible and that the truth existed only with us. But as I got older, the doubts started to grow. Why didn't some doctrines make sense? Why did the teachings feel forced and lacking clear explanations? It was in this internal conflict that I began my search, until one day I found a truth I would have never imagined. And it was at the most unexpected moment of my life that I discovered a peace my former faith could never offer me. My name is David Walker, I'm 23 years old, and I'm from Los Angeles, California. I grew up in a Jehovah's Witness family, where I was taught from an early age to believe that only our faith was true, and that the Bible contained all the answers to life and salvation. I was raised with the certainty that all other religions were wrong, and that ours was the only one worth following. Our family routine was strict and structured. We attended regular meetings, went out for evangelizing campaigns, and our lives were 100% centered around faith. Religion was literally the foundation of everything we did. Everything we learned and thought went through the filter of the Bible. However, as I grew older and began to observe the world more critically, doubts began to arise. I kept asking myself, if our faith is the only true one, why did so many of my questions have no clear answers? And it was in this moment of inner conflict that I began searching for something more. I didn't know what, but I felt that the truth was bigger than what I had been told. Before I continue with my testimony, leave a comment letting me know where you're watching this video from. I want to see how far this message is reaching. As I matured, the doubts within me began to grow. I could no longer accept vague answers or explanations that didn't make sense. Something didn't feel right, but no one in my community seemed willing to discuss these issues honestly. I would ask myself, for example, why did the concept of original sin never make sense to me? If we're all condemned for something that happened thousands of years ago, how is that fair? And more importantly, if we were the only true Christians, why were there so many good people in the world who didn't follow our faith? These questions started to consume me, but I couldn't find any clear answers. Whenever I brought up these issues with the elders or other members of the congregation, the response was almost always, "You need to have more faith and trust in God." But that only made my doubts worse. How could I have faith in something I couldn't fully understand? That's when I realized the answers just weren't there, and I started to feel a lack of clarity in my faith. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. I felt that if the truth were really that obvious and clear, I should be able to understand it and answer my own questions without difficulty. This led me to make a difficult decision, to look for answers outside of my religion. I didn't know exactly where to find them, but something inside me told me there was more. I needed clear answers, something that would truly make me feel at peace. The search for answers led me down an unexpected path. In a moment of loneliness and spiritual discouragement, I was watching a TV program that talked about Islam. At first, the language seemed strange and distant, but there was something different about it. It wasn't like the news or documentaries I was used to, which always portrayed Islam negatively. I found myself paying close attention to every word, even though I didn't fully understand what was being said. At the end of the program, they offered a free Quran. In that moment, something inside me said, I need to know more. Without knowing much about what the Quran was or what my journey would look like, I decided to request the book. When the Quran arrived, I felt a mix of curiosity and hesitation. It was a huge book and seemed intimidating. I was afraid of doing something wrong, but I knew I needed to understand what was inside it. At first, I started reading some introductory books that came with the Quran, and I immediately began finding answers to the questions that had consumed me for so long. Each chapter I read seemed to address my doubts in a clear and direct way. And it was there, in the pages of the Quran, that I found, for the first time, a faith that made sense to me. It wasn't a faith based on hard-to-understand dogmas or confusing mysteries. It was a logical, clear faith, full of truth. Islam taught me something simple yet profound: submission to the will of God. The concept of God in Islam made me feel like I had found something real, something I could truly understand. I finally felt that the questions I had always carried could be answered directly, without complexity. When I started reading the Quran, the sense of clarity I experienced was unlike anything I'd ever felt. The answers to the questions that had tormented me for so long began to appear before me in a simple and direct way. I had never imagined that a religion could be so logical, so coherent, and at the same time so deep. What touched me the most was the unique view of God I found in Islam. God in Islam is one, indivisible, and completely transcendent. There was nothing confusing or contradictory about it, unlike what I felt in Christian doctrines. The Islamic view of not associating anyone with God, not even Jesus, made more sense to me than anything I had ever learned in my life. In addition, the Quran made it clear that all prophets from Adam to Muhammad had the same mission, to invite people to worship one God alone. That was a revelation to me. I had never thought that Jesus, whom I had always seen as divine, was actually a prophet, sent with the same message as Moses and all the others. That answered one of my biggest doubts about Christianity and its concept of the Trinity. With every page of the Quran, I felt a heavy curtain of confusion being lifted. I was beginning to understand what was truly important, a direct connection with God. We didn't need intermediaries. There was nothing complicated or out of reach. I finally felt I was discovering a religion that not only made sense, but also invited me to reflect and act directly, according to the will of God. Islam gave me clear answers to questions I had carried since childhood, and the peace I found in the Quran was the real kind of peace, something Christianity had never been able to give me. I no longer needed complex explanations or forced answers. Islam didn't give me empty responses, but rather a call to action, a clear path to follow. The spiritual transformation I experienced upon discovering Islam was gradual, but deep. I knew something was changing in my heart. The answers I found in the Quran weren't just intellectual, they were emotional and spiritual too. I felt a deep connection with God, something I had never experienced in my previous faith. That's when I started asking myself, why wait? Why postpone this transformation if I had already found the truth? Islam was no longer a distant religion to me. I no longer saw contradictions in the doctrines that used to confuse me. I no longer felt the need to fully understand everything before committing. I already knew enough, and Islam was offering me peace in a way I never thought possible. So I decided to make my Shahada, declaration of faith. I knew this was the first step I needed to take. It was a moment of clarity. I was no longer the same. I had found the true purpose of my life. It was incredible, but also terrifying. I knew my family and my community wouldn't understand. My father, who was still a devout Jehovah's Witness, would never accept my choice. Choosing Islam meant breaking away from everything I had ever known, including the view of God that had been taught to me since birth. I knew rejection would come, but I also knew my conviction had never been stronger. By becoming Muslim, I began to live according to the principles of Islam. Daily prayer, fasting during Ramadan, and the constant pursuit of knowledge gave me a renewed purpose. Islam wasn't just a change of faith, it was a change of life. My routine and behavior were transformed. I began to see the world in a more peaceful and balanced way. When I made the decision to become Muslim, I knew the consequences would be deep, but I had no idea how much it would impact my family. As a Jehovah's Witness, I had always had a strong bond with my parents and my religious community. Loyalty to the faith was seen as a virtue, and by stepping away from that, I was basically breaking with everything I had been taught. Right after making my Shahada, I called my father to tell him about my conversion. He was furious. The conversation was difficult, and he firmly told me, "You're wrong. I taught you everything you needed to know. Islam is a lie, and you're going to regret this." The rejection was painful, but I knew I had found the truth. The pain I felt was real, but the peace I experienced in my heart when I prayed and followed the teachings of Islam told me there was no turning back. I couldn't stop thinking about all the lies I had been taught, not only about Islam, but about my own faith. I wasn't abandoning God as my father suggested. I was reconnecting with him in a deeper and more authentic way. That rejection didn't just come from my father, it came from other members of my family as well. They saw me as lost, someone who had abandoned the true faith to follow something completely unknown. It hurt, but it didn't make me give up. At times, the loneliness was almost unbearable. I wanted my family to understand me, but I knew the spiritual truth I had found in Islam couldn't be forced on anyone. They had to make their own spiritual journey, just as I had. But even with all the rejection, I found comfort in the Muslim community, which welcomed me in a way I never thought possible. There, I felt at home, surrounded by people who not only accepted my faith, but respected it and lived it with authenticity. It was a sense of belonging I had never felt before. Over time, the pain of family rejection began to turn into something different. Islam gave me a new perspective on life, a way of seeing the world with more peace and less anxiety. Through praying 5 times a day, I felt a direct connection with God like never before. Prayer became my refuge, the place where I could finally find clarity and balance. Islam taught me something deeply powerful. We don't need intermediaries to reach God. There's no need for complicated rituals or divine figures to connect with the Creator. I felt an immense peace in understanding that God is one, and that through pure submission, I could reach Him. This understanding brought me a profound relief that my former faith had never given me. Moreover, Islam wasn't limited to prayer alone. It brought a transformation in how I viewed human relationships, especially with my family and friends. Even though I was initially rejected, I began to see people with more compassion and less judgment. The moral teachings of Islam, like honoring one's parents, caring for elders, and upholding personal integrity, became the foundation of my new life. My social life also began to transform. I no longer felt lost or without direction. Now I had purpose, and that purpose wasn't tied to accumulating wealth or chasing hollow social standards. I knew my mission was deeper, to share what I had found with the world. That's how I began to get involved in dawah, inviting others to Islam, and sharing my story with others. It was fulfilling to realize that by practicing the teachings of Islam, my life began to improve. Even with the family challenges, I began to understand that Islam had given me something more precious than any earthly relationship, a real connection with the Creator and a constant sense of peace. The things that used to bother me no longer had the same weight. With every prayer, I felt closer to who I truly am and who I was always meant to be. After my conversion to Islam, my life began to change in ways I never imagined. By fully committing to the faith, I became more aware of my actions, more focused, and more balanced. The daily practices of Islam, like prayer and fasting during Ramadan, gave me a new perspective on time and on what truly matters in life. Through Islam, I realized that life isn't about accumulating wealth or following the superficial standards imposed by society. My goal was now centered on something far greater, serving God and helping others find the true peace that I had found. What once seemed trivial now became meaningful. Every act of kindness, every word I spoke, was now an opportunity to live out the teachings of Islam and connect with others in a genuine way. As I began sharing my story with others, I realized the power of da'wah, the invitation to Islam. Islam isn't just a religion, it's a way of living with purpose. I wanted people to know about the peace I had found and the spiritual clarity Islam had given me. I started talking about my journey with family, friends, and even strangers, and I quickly saw the difference my words and actions could make in other people's lives. It was in that moment that my role as a Muslim began to expand. It was no longer just about me and my personal journey. It was about how my testimony could help others overcome their own doubts and spiritual insecurities. Islam was no longer just a part of my life. It became the essence of everything I did. And with this new identity, I found not only a supportive Muslim community, but also a renewed sense of purpose and mission. The decision to convert to Islam brought a significant change in how I was perceived by many. Unlike other religions, Islam still carries stigma and prejudice in many places, especially among those who don't fully understand it. As a young American convert to Islam, I found myself facing a major social challenge. I not only had to deal with family rejection, but also with the suspicious looks of society in general. At first, even my closest friends didn't know what to think about my conversion. To them, I had made a radical and incomprehensible decision. The negative images of Islam, often associated with violence and extremism by the media, created invisible barriers between me and the people who once saw my former faith as the truth. It was hard to deal with the prejudice, especially when they began associating my conversion with baseless stereotypes. But instead of turning away from Islam, those difficulties only made me stronger. Islam taught me to be patient, to respond with kindness, and to maintain my integrity, even when others couldn't see or understand my intentions. Every suspicious glance, every negative comment, reminded me of the deeper purpose I had found. I was no longer seeking the approval of others, but the approval of God. Over time, people's reactions began to change. Some, after seeing me practice my faith genuinely and peacefully, became curious about Islam. Some even asked to learn more. That was a confirmation that true transformation starts from within and reflects in one's actions and character. Instead of isolating me from society, Islam taught me to be a positive example to others, even in the face of adversity. As I delved deeper into Islam, my life began to transform not only externally, but also internally in a profound way. I was no longer simply following rituals. I was living according to a new philosophy that brought balance and harmony. Islam gave me something I never knew I was missing: unshakable inner peace. The daily prayers, fasting during Ramadan, and constant study of the Quran gave me a sense of direction and purpose that I had never experienced before. Each prayer wasn't just a ritualistic act, but an opportunity to speak with God and find clarity for my daily decisions. Islam taught me to view the world through a lens of gratitude and humility, which completely changed how I interacted with the people around me. Moreover, Islam gave me a clear perspective on what truly matters in life. I was no longer concerned with external validation or the opinions of others. I knew that the only approval that truly mattered was God's. That understanding gave me an emotional and spiritual freedom I never thought possible. Islam didn't just give me spiritual answers. It helped me redefine my life in a way that aligned with strong values and principles. The most beautiful part of it all was realizing that this change wasn't just internal. The peace and confidence I felt in my faith began to show in my actions. I became more patient with others, more willing to help, and more aware of my responsibilities as a Muslim. Acts of solidarity and community, pillars of Islam, became an essential part of my everyday life. Today, looking back, I can see how deeply my life has changed since I decided to follow Islam. The journey wasn't easy, and the initial rejection from my family and society challenged me more than I could have ever imagined. But it was through those hardships that my faith grew stronger. Islam taught me to respond to hatred with patience, to face adversity with courage, and to live my faith in an authentic and humble way. I'm no longer the lost and directionless young man I once was. Islam gave me purpose, clarity, and a direct connection with God. I found peace, a peace that no other religion had ever been able to offer me. Every aspect of my life, from my relationship with my family to the way I see the world, has been transformed by the beauty and truth of Islam. If you're watching this video and you feel like you also have doubts or unanswered questions about your own faith, I invite you to reflect. Islam doesn't require you to abandon your doubts or questions without first seeking them out sincerely. Searching for truth is a journey we all must take, and I found mine in Islam. If you're looking for peace and meaning in your life, I invite you to take the next step. Open your heart to Islam and see how it can transform your life the way it transformed mine. Share this video with friends and family who might benefit from this message. Leave a comment and share your own faith journey, because together we can seek the truth and find peace.